All right, this is our second asynchronous video, and I want to start off by reviewing some of the things you read about in the Thinker's Almanac, the first reading that we had, which covered February 7, 8, and 9. So look at these definitions and see if these ring a bell. Could you come up with a term if I told you the definition was a feature in the environment that influences or alters our behavior or decisions? That could be conscious decision or it could be unconscious. And remember, that's what we call a nudge. And that has to do with that fly in the urinal in the airport in Amsterdam. How about giving in to self-limiting beliefs, past failures, or perceived shortcomings that are based on assumptions that are not necessarily valid and that hold us back from new efforts? So all of us are guilty from time to time to not trying new things, not taking certain risks because of past things that happened to us. And if you remember, that has something to do with a fish as a metaphor, and remember that's what they called Pike syndrome. How about an erroneous assumption that because an event occurred first, it must have caused this later event? Again, that's the classic fallacy called ad hoc, ergo propter hoc. And it's also known as the Chanticleer fallacy because the rooster believes that by crowing it causes the sun to rise. A series of tests which must be passed by all black cab drivers before they can get a license to work in the capital. This is London. And do we remember what that tests were called? Well, those tests are called, appropriately enough, the knowledge, because you must have the knowledge in order to be qualified. Next term, an umbrella term that refers to the brain's ability to modify, change, and adapt both structures and function throughout life. So a lot of people think, oh, there's only a certain window for learning. Well, neuroscience has shown us that we all have this thing called neural plasticity, which allows us to learn throughout our life. And the last one, the assertion that the key to achieving true expertise in any skill is simply a matter of practicing, albeit in the correct way, for a long period of time. So this was the example that came from the Beatles. A lot of people think they were an overnight success. They were not. They worked for years and years in dive bars working on their craft. And that's the idea of the $10,000 rule. So anyway, if you got those terms, you know those terms, you're probably good to go. But if you don't know, you might want to go back and check some of those in the Thinker's Almanac. All right, let's take a look at the sentence. Bill, an experienced driver, circumvented the traffic jam on the highway by using the back roads. So first off, it looks like we've got an appositive phrase here, right? We're telling more about Bill. And whenever we do that, we put commas around the appositive phrase. So Bill circumvented the traffic jam. That's the core idea in that sentence. We just added a phrase, an appositive phrase there. On the highway, prepositional phrase, by using the back roads. This is a verb phrase, but it can't stand by itself, can it? By using the back roads. We don't have a subject there. So I don't think we need any punctuation there. Certainly not a semicolon. So I think that is a good sentence now. Now, circumvented, when you circumvent, you find a way around something. That's where the circumference part comes into it. So you can either circumvent something literally, like driving around it, or figuratively, as in circumventing some kind of a system. And of course, circumnavigating is to sail around or travel around. All right, so what did we change here? We added the commas around the appositive phrase. We got rid of all other commas because those are just tacked on details in the form of prepositional phrases, verb phrase there, which would actually be a participial phrase, wouldn't it? Because it works like an adjective. All right, some words for before. These were nouns. Do you remember a noun for a retaliatory accusation? So if somebody says something bad to you and you say something back to them about them that's negative, it'd be nice to have one word for that. And then showing evidence of involvement in a crime. This would be more of a kind of a legal term. Can you think about those? Crime is kind of a hint because a retaliatory accusation is recrimination, and showing evidence of involvement is incrimination. So if you are incriminated, that's the verb form in a crime, means you're guilty. All right, so last time we talked about adverb clauses, and I wanted to kind of review this. So let's say we've got two sentences here. Roger spent a week sleeping on the porch. Roger forgot his wedding anniversary for the 10th straight year. It would make sense to combine those. There's many ways we could do it, but one of the things we could do is show kind of the cause and effect using a dependent clause. So think about a subordinated conjunction. We're talking about a reason that he had to stay on the why he was sleeping on the porch. So it makes sense to use that one of those words. Let's say because. Here's another couple sentences. The teacher announced that the class was canceled. The class cheered. Again, we could combine those in many different ways, but let's try to make one of these an adverb clause, meaning a dependent clause using one of those subordinated conjunctions. So because he forgot his wedding anniversary for the 10th straight year, Roger spent a week sleeping on the porch. So because there is our subordinated conjunction, it makes this a dependent clause. We need the comma there when we start, and then we have the independent clause. So classic complex sentence now. When the teacher announced that the test was canceled, the class cheered. So notice in this one, we start with the dependent clause again. And when is the subordinated clause there, or subordinated word, the subordinated conjunction that opens up the dependent clause. So those are both adverb clauses. Now we want to look at the other kind of clause we use frequently with a complex sentence, and it's called a adverb clause. So you want to combine these sentences. The boy was caught. He had stolen the purse. Obviously, we would want to combine those. So a natural way to do that would be the boy who had stolen the purse was caught. So notice what we did here is we took this one of these clauses, he had stolen the purse, we put who in front of it, and we put it right after the noun, the boy, the subject here. So this is not an appositive phrase because it doesn't just rename the boy, it has also a verb in here, so it's a verb phrase. And who is the subject. But notice again, just like an adverb clause, it's dependent. Who had stolen the purse? That would not be a sentence by itself. So we use these very similarly to appositive phrases, except they're not phrases or clauses because they have a subject and a verb. Here's another couple sentences. Most people love pizza. Pizza is not very healthy. Could we make one of those a clause, a dependent clause, using one of these words like who, what, where? Well, pizza, which most people love, is not very healthy. So notice how we've got pizza is not very healthy. That's our independent clause. And then we made this other sentence dependent by using which most people love. And in this case, notice we set off with commas because in this case, we don't have to, we understand we're talking about any pizza here. And we just added some details about it. So when you just add details about it that aren't necessary, you put commas around it. Here's a little one, one that's a bit different. Fruit that is grown organically is expensive. Notice we're not talking about all fruit. We're talking about just fruit that is grown organically. So this clause is essential, and that's when we use that instead of which. So think about typically when you see this, which has commas around it because that's unessential information, non-essential information. But when the information is essential like this, we're not talking about all fruit. We're just talking about fruit that is grown organically. In that case, we use that and we don't put commas around it. Again, just some of those basic rules. And again, when you read things, you'll start seeing this pop up. All right, so here's another example. The store where the new phone was being sold had a huge line of people outside of it. So notice where is the word here that takes the place, if that is the subject. So these are the words that you'll see that begin these adjective clauses. They're not subordinated conjunctions. They are these words that we typically think of pronouns: who, which, that, where, whose. And when we use those to begin a clause, a dependent clause, we call them relative pronouns. And again, just notice how they're different from subordinated conjunctions. Here's our subordinated conjunctions that we looked at last time. And you should kind of start to distinguish those two, because it's the difference between writing an adjective clause that modifies a noun versus a adverb clause which modifies the verb. All right, and then the last thing I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the next section on word days, which I think is posted now, February 10, 11, and 12. Again, 3 days covering 3 different subjects. I think we've seen this idea before, the M&M writer from Van Halen, but you should know what that's all about. So read that. Again, if it doesn't say Thinker's Almanac, you don't have to read it, but you should read this one, which is February 11th. This one's all about Rene Descartes. You probably have heard of I think, therefore I am, but we need to know a little bit more about that. And then finally, I want you to read about February 12th, which happens to be the birthday of Charles Darwin. And this isn't so much about Charles Darwin and evolution as it is about Charles Darwin and matrimony, because he, being a scientist, wanted a systematic way of figuring out whether or not he should get married. So read that. And again, these are concepts that make us think about thinking, so that's metacognition. Okay, so that's the plan for next time. And I'll see you then.